Hello, everyone. How are you guys doing tonight? All right, we just flipped Orange County blue. I'm gonna try that again. How are you guys doing tonight? Thank you so much for coming out. Thank you so much for joining us at home if you're watching the live stream. Tonight, we're going to be having our California State Forum at District 37. So the first things first, I want to give you guys a little bit of background real quick. The 37th District is actually currently held by John Moorlach, and he is the incumbent. Well, here's the deal. Don't boom till I tell you this. We invited him to come. I went to his office and I hand-delivered an invitation because I did want him to come because I wanted to hear the issues. And that's the whole theme of tonight, is that tonight is about the issues. I know some of us are excited because we're wearing our shirts for our team, but we want to remember that we're all together on the same team to save democracy, right? Right? So that's what we want to keep on our mind, right? So we're all on the same team to save democracy. So I invited Moorlach and they didn't respond. I called back and they're like, oh, well, we're really busy and you can't just expect us to respond to you in 24 hours. And I was like, no, this was like 2 weeks ago. And they're like, oh, okay. So they said that they had another speaking engagement to make. We also, on top of that, invited one of their representatives to come and do an opening statement. They did not get back to us. So here's the deal. For me, it's about representation, right? And so for me, it's about someone who's going to go that extra mile and represent you and represent your values. And that's why we're all here tonight, is to find the person who best reflects that, right? So, and as we move forward, it's crazy to think that just a year ago, we were doing this all for the congressional, right? But all of us came in on different sides and we had different opinions, but we all had to leave after that primary on one team in order to do something great. So I really want us all to focus in this moment about that there's no one here that's the bad guy. We're all here together to learn about the issues and to work together. Sound good? Cool. So we did a coin toss backstage. A couple things. I have this. Remember, no phones. So please silence your phones. We don't want any phones on right now and like interrupting. And we're asking the candidates, please don't have your phones. Don't bring them up. The candidates did a coin toss and to determine who was going to go first to like do the opening statements. Katrina Foley will be doing the opening. Mayor Katrina Foley will be doing the opening statements, and she will be doing the closing for the closing. We have a team of moderators. Can we give them a hand? They've all worked really hard and they're our experts. We've taken your questions over the last 2 weeks to try to synthesize some good stuff to be able to ask them. Now, I'm going to call your candidates out and that will be the last time you guys can clap. I'm not joking. What we're gonna do is we're gonna do indivisible house rules, right? So if you like something, raise your hands and shake them. And if you don't like something, have a nice face and just, okay? Like, we're not gonna do any booing or hissing, mostly for 2 reasons. Number one, it stops the debate. It stops the forum. They cannot finish until you stop doing what you're doing. And secondly, our audience at home, it messes with the sound. So like when we have all the clapping and stuff like that, then they can't hear the really great point that your candidate just made. So we wanna try to do spirit fingers or like just, meh. All right, so I'm now going to announce the candidates to come on up. We have Mayor Katrina Foley. Come on up, Mayor Katrina Foley. And as she comes up, I want you guys to look at your programs. That has like the run of show. It has our moderators. And you guys should have gotten programs. If not, I'll make sure that one of this team in a shirt goes grab some programs to hand out. We have Mayor Katrina Foley. Are you here? And we have Dave Min. Come on up, Dave. Does anyone know where? There she is. Mayor Katrina Foley, come on down. Let's give her a round of applause. Let's give everyone a round of applause. Good to see you, Dave. As you guys will also see, you guys have props before you guys are gonna do your opening statements, but you guys have props. We're gonna have a rapid fire round. Here you go. We're gonna ask you guys 20 questions after your opening statements. You do not have a photo booth. But we're going to ask them really quickly, rapid fire 20 questions, like, do you like Obama? And then they hold up yes or no or well. Now, when they hold up the well, they only get to do that twice, and they have 30 seconds to explain to the moderator why they said well. So maybe you're like, oh, do you like Reagan? And you're like, well, he was, so you go into that, right? That's kind of the deal. So, opening statements, that's going to start with Mayor Foley. And go ahead.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us here. My name is Katrina Foley, and I am the first directly elected mayor for the city of Costa Mesa. And yes, thank you. And also, I have been married to my husband, Casey Swanson, who is a teacher for 28 years. We have 2 sons who are in college. I'm an employee rights attorney representing victims of harassment, sexual harassment, discrimination, and retaliation. And I'm really excited to run for State Senate for District 37. I'm a Head Start graduate, so I understand the needs of our families who are financially insecure. I grew up on the free school lunch program, so that's important to me to protect those safety nets. I also went to college at UCLA on a Pell Grant, and that's how I got my education, which gave me a ticket to the future, and is the only reason I'm standing right here before you today. I did a scholarship for law school, and in law school, I was the chair of the Women's Law Caucus. I have been fighting and advocating for the most vulnerable and for women and equality my entire career. I'm really honored to be supported by just today, the National Women's Political Caucus. I also, this weekend, got the Young Dems of California, and I also have Harley Ruda, who is our amazing congressman, and Cotty Petrie Norris, who is also our assemblywoman in the district. I am supported, and you can see in my materials outside, I am the labor candidate. I have, 18 or 20 labor organizations have endorsed me, including Orange County Labor Fed, Orange County Employees Association, and the Newport Mesa Federation of Teachers, to just name a few. I'd be honored to serve as your next state senator, and I think I have the experience to hit the ground running and solve issues for our community. I'll share more about that later. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dave Min. I'm a law professor here, just across the way. I'm running for state senate in this district, and as a lot of you know, I'm not your typical politician. I've not been someone who aspired to elected office. I've spent my career in public service, in public policy primarily. After graduating from Harvard Law School in 2002, I was the only person from my class to go join the staff of the Securities and Exchange Commission. If you remember that year, it was the year right after we had the Enron and WorldCom accounting scandals. I've spent my career fighting for a fair economy, fighting to crack down on corporate fraud, to try to help working families. I went on to work for Senator Schumer on Capitol Hill as a senior advisor. And then worked at a think tank called the Center for American Progress, where I helped develop the leading mortgage modification programs implemented by the Obama administration, helped develop some signature legislative packages that I'm happy to go into detail. And look, this time in 2016, I can tell you that I was looking around. I have 3 young children. My youngest was not even a year old at that point in time. But right now, we're at a crossroads. This country is not what it used to be, and unless we change course, we're leaving behind a horrible future for the next generation. My parents are immigrants. My mom was a refugee from North Korea who fled to the South with the rise of the communists. My parents grew up during the Korean War and the aftermath when they were lucky to get an egg with their meals. They came here on a government program. They are the embodiment of the American dream. We all share that story. And that's what we're losing right now, because unless we act, my young children, the next generation, young people here will not have the future that we had, the future of brightness and opportunity. I've got an experience in public policy, in making big picture ideas work on the ground. So I ask for your support, not just because I'm the strongest equipped to win, and I am. The polling is very clear on this front. I'm the only candidate that is beating John Moorlach right now, and we're beating him by 9 points. But I'm asking for your support because we have to change things around. California has to lead. I'm hopeful that when my kids are my age, they will look back on Donald Trump as an ugly footnote in history books, but that will only happen if California leads the way. Thank you very much. Love the spirit hands.
Thank you guys so much.
My
name is Kylie. I'm going to be one of your moderators.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
If someone says that he's the only candidate backing and beating John Morlock by 9 points, is there a way, I thought we had a response, we could respond to that.
That was the opening statements. So
Okay.
we're going to let the opening statements go.
Okay.
It's brought up in the debate, then we can, that would be.
Okay, sorry, I just wasn't sure how that was going to work. Okay,
No
thanks.
worries. It looks like it will happen again, so we'll have the opportunity. We have our first moderator.
Yeah, so I'm Kylie. I will be the moderator on education, but I will be going over our rapid fire, so get ready to pull out your cards. So first, in your opinion, is housing a fundamental human right? Awesome. Should we drug test people whom are applying for affordable or supportive housing? Should unarmed citizen casualties caused in the course of law enforcement duties be included in discussions of gun violence prevention? Will you be a champion for reproductive justice? Will you support any new offshore drilling off the coast of California? Would you support requiring affordable and supportive housing developments to have project labor agreement if they are utilizing state funding sources for development and construction? Would you ban e-cigarettes and vaping devices based on the current lung disease and death
I
outbreak?
missed the question. Would you ban them?
Ban e-cigarettes and vaping devices, yes. Would you ban flavored tobacco, including menthol, from California, knowing the tobacco industry purposefully targets children and priority populations such as the LGBT community? Thank you. Do you support that all medical students and current providers should have to undergo an entire year of LGBTQ health training?
I support.
Do you commit to hire diverse staffers from marginalized communities? When looking at environment and climate change proposals, do you agree with the 2030 deadline created by the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report?
Faster.
I think we should be more aggressive.
Yeah, I was just going to say faster.
Awesome, thank you. Would you support legislation addressing campaign reform in state elections?
What kind of campaign reform?
It does not, just
campaign
campaign
finance?
reform, just kind of in general.
Yes, but I would qualify that just by saying we have to really reform campaign finance. I support democracy dollars and attempts to democratize the system. At the state level, we have to do what we can to hold off the attacks on clean elections, which are coming from a federal judiciary that unfortunately we don't have power over. So yes, I support these, but we have to be clear about what we're trying to do.
Gotcha.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Procedural. So if you do an answer to the well, is there a time limit?
It should be 30 seconds.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Do you commit to hold regular town halls to communicate with your constituents? Do you commit to gender pay parity among your staffers? Do you support fracking, acidization, or any other types of extraction methods? Will your campaign take money from any corporate oil PACs? Would you support public funding being allocated to charter schools? Okay, expand on that, please.
Right now, public funding is already allocated to some charter schools, for example, the Samueli Center, the Orange County High School of the Arts. But as it relates to public funding being allocated to charter schools that are just trying to replace a regular elementary school, I do not support that unless it's compliant with all of these accountabilities that we have in public education. Accountabilities for budgeting, for paying teachers well, for certifying teachers properly. And so there are some specialty schools that charter schools already are working well, and they have those accountabilities, but otherwise I don't.
Okay, thank you.
I think we could move some of those charter schools in and recategorize them as magnet schools and achieve the same outcomes.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
I think you've already had
Oh, I'm
two
so
wells.
sorry.
It's
Okay.
okay.
I'm out.
We only have
I'm
3 more
out.
questions. Should every student be required to complete an ethnic studies course in order to graduate high school in the state of California? Do you believe the First Amendment allows for businesses to refuse to serve or work with members of the LGBTQ community?
First Amendment.
And last but not least, will you call on your supporters to support the eventual winner of the primary? Awesome. Thank you guys so much.
Are we done with these?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're done with this.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're done with the rapid fire questions. Now we're on to kind of our more specified questions. So each answer for this question has 60 seconds. So first, California has a Democratic majority for state representatives. If either of you were to be elected, you would have much more leverage than exists for Senate District 37 now to make a stronger budget request because you would be a part of the majority. What would you ask to fund for and why? Mayor Foley, you can go first, please.
That's really easy. I would ask that we fund homeless solutions and that we direct the homeless money and take it away from going to the county, where the county just decides arbitrarily how it's being dispersed, and give it directly to cities that are actually doing the solving of homeless solutions, like Costa Mesa, like Irvine, like Fullerton. There's a lot of cities that are actually doing the work and aren't getting any funding. So that's one thing. Also, building affordable housing. That would be something that I would direct funds to. And then, of course, I would direct funds directly to helping to create electric charging stations and a feasibility studies that cities could fund to create a whole comprehensive plan for electric charging stations. That's the only way that we're going to make a dent in carbon emissions, is if we get people out of cars relying on fossil fuels and into electric cars.
Okay, thank you. David, you have 60 seconds.
So I agree on the affordable housing and homelessness fronts. I guess I'd also point out that at the state level, there's a frustration with Orange County because Orange County has a significant pool of money for mental health that could be used for homelessness. We're not using it. We've got to also equip that budget request with overrides and sticks and carrots to force non-compliant localities, cities, counties, et cetera, to comply with the law. We have too much intransigence here in Orange County. They call it local control. Look, I favor a lot of local control, but when it's opposed to really important statewide priorities, we have to have levers to pull on those, so that's really important. I also support, when we talk about other things we need to support, we have right now in our educational system, we have this CHIA, California Healthy Youth Act, that is also not being taught and implemented the way it's supposed to be. We have to accompany that with levers. So the model that's being used right now is SB1, which is the gas tax funding. That funding is being used as an incentive to cities and states, cities and counties that are not complying. You don't get the money if you don't comply. We need to have more stuff like that.
Great. Thanks so much. My name is Mike Young. I'm the political director with the California League of Conservation Voters. We're moving into the climate change questions. The first question for both of you. The climate crisis is no longer a thing that's coming. It's here. While our focus is often on mitigating our climate emissions, and we absolutely need to continue to do so, we must also increase our climate resiliency and adapt to the crisis impacts. What does Senate District 37 need to do to become more resilient? And what do you propose to do as a senator to make that happen? Mr. Min, you get the first question.
Great question. Look, we're in a situation right now where SD 37 is on the front lines of a lot of climate change effects. We're going to see the effects of rising sea levels here because we have a big coastline. We also have the canyon areas that's right near the wildfires. So we get in on both ends. As far as wildfires, I think the answer is fairly simple. We have to harden the homes. What we saw in the recent fires up in Northern California is that fire breaks, which were thought to be effective, actually don't work all that well with a lot of wind going around. We also need to start moving people away, transitioning away from development on the coast and otherwise. So disincentivizing that, I think right now, starting aggressively right now, we could do that through things like refusing to have subsidies for insurance or reinsurance for homes that are built in high-risk areas. We have to start moving people in with incentives now because the more we develop on the coast, the more tragedy we're going to face. But I agree with you. We're facing 4 degrees Celsius right now. That's almost 8 degrees Fahrenheit average temperature increase in the next 30 years. That's going to be catastrophic for us.
Can you repeat
Mayor
the
Foley?
question?
So what do you think Senate District 37 needs to do to become more climate resilient? And what would you propose to do as a senator to make that happen?
Okay, thank you. So as mayor, I have already begun that process. We have recently hired an energy and sustainability manager. I think that's something that we should encourage all cities. And as your state senator, I can have influence on that, as well as to help provide funding for making sure that happens. Also, banning styrofoam. City of Costa Mesa has banned styrofoam, and it's not just at City Hall, but it's with vendors who utilize our parks, our open spaces, and our city halls. Also, going back to my comment about reducing car emissions, an aggressive electric vehicle strategy is something that we really need to focus on, and that'll be my priority in Sacramento. allowing cities to be able to have access to funding so that they can include throughout their city vehicle charging stations, and so that we can also make vehicles that are electric less expensive for the whole all of the residents in the community, so that low-income families can actually purchase an electric vehicle also and help us on this journey.
While toxic contamination and people's likelihood of being exposed to toxics are a problem in a lot of communities, people are also facing exposure through their occupation and products in daily use. These problems tend to be much more prevalent in underserved communities and communities of color. What will you do to address the disparate burden of environmental pollution and chemical exposure on different communities across the state and across the district? What more should we do to ensure that environmental justice for our communities, or that there is environmental justice for our communities, regardless of people's backgrounds or where people live and work?
Thank you. That's a lot to unpack. But there, 2 years ago, Senator Lara, he had a bill that required all cleaning supplies be labeled so that the toxic chemicals would be identified. Just this last session, Senator Connie Leyva, who has endorsed our campaign, she had a bill, SB 574, which would require that the toxic chemicals in fragrances that women and men put on, that those be identified so that we could start to eliminate toxic chemicals from the things that people actually put right on their bodies. That bill didn't make it through to the governor's desk, but we will work on that together. I know that I can work with Senator Leyva to make sure that we are holding people accountable, companies accountable, in making sure that they're not putting toxic chemicals. I mean, I fed my kids organic milk and I breastfed for a reason. I didn't want them to have toxic chemicals in their bodies. I also have been a vegetarian for my whole life since about, I was 19 years old. It's important that we make sure we protect our health.
Could you repeat the question, Mike?
Yeah. What more should we be doing to ensure that there is environmental justice for our communities, regardless of their background? And what will you do to address that disparate burden?
Yeah, look, environmental justice has got to be a critical part of our strategy in this state for dealing with climate change that we know is coming. Unfortunately, we know that within the state and globally, it's going to be poor people, people of color that are going to be bearing the disproportionate burdens here, whether it's PFAS, exposure to PFAS chemicals from runoff from water, workplace contaminants. We have to be more aggressive. So I would propose expanding the authority of the Department of Toxic Substances Control, which is responsible for regulating chemicals. At the same time, we have to have people who are out in the community mindful of the particularized threats we face. There's no way that I can tell you right now what all the different issues are in underserved communities, underrepresented communities, but we know they exist. We know they're going to bear the burdens here. You need a state senator who is willing to go out there, talk to those people, stand with those people. And I'm proud to say that we've built a very diverse community. I'm running to be the first and only Asian American Democrat in the state Senate, let alone the federal level or the county level. We need diversity up there. We need people who are going to listen to the concerns of underrepresented folks.
And now, actually, to follow up to something both of you have mentioned. So we both talked about climate. You both talked about impacting disparate communities. Sometimes the government actually leaves a choice. California this past year passed the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund. It was something I'm sorry?
Say that last sentence.
We passed the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund here in California. Right? It was a great bill overall, except the program it basically takes $100 million a year to provide safe and affordable drinking water for communities that are heavily impacted and lack clean drinking water. But it took it out of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which is the fund that actually is needed to combat our climate emissions. And this is going to be a yearly impact. Year after year, $100 million is going from one to the other. But communities actually need both. We both need climate. We need to address climate, and we need to address clean water. So how do you propose to raise more funding for the GGRF and climate in general, while also ensuring that communities have clean water? And how will you use your role as senator to make that happen? And I believe, Mr. Min, you have the first.
Sure. That's a great question. And I will say I've come out in support of the Green New Deal. I know it's controversial. You don't have to support every part of it. But look, this is a crisis.
Sorry, could you get closer to your podium? Because I think the camera is having trouble
I'm so
seeing
sorry.
you. Yeah.
Gotcha. I like to walk around. So look, I've supported the Green New Deal because I think it's critical that we act right now, that we also, I know what I tell Republicans is this is an enormous economic opportunity. How do we fund some of that? Because I think Orange County, by the way, could be ground zero for being the next Silicon Valley. It's going to be in green technology. We know that we've got the renewables down here. We've got great research right in this university. We've got the infrastructure. We've got the venture capital, the financing to make this happen. But we're going to need money. And so I am supportive, and I've talked with the controller a little bit about this, of finding ways to start pricing carbon and returning some of that back to you all in the form of sales tax or income tax reductions, but also using part of that to fund some of the priorities we're talking about. Funding clean water, funding research and commercialization of green technology, because California right now is only responsible for at 2% of the world's carbon emissions. We can get down to zero, we have to, but that's not going to move the needle enough. We are going to get there by exporting green technology to the rest of the world. That's how we're going to save the world.
Mayor Foley?
Yes, so as mayor, I'm working right now with council member Marr, and we are putting together a plan to support a resolution for HR 763, which is the Carbon Fee and Dividend Act. And actually, that is actually going to provide more opportunities for returning some of that money back to the community, and even better than the cap and trade system that we have now. And so I think programs like that are modeled after that legislation is what we need to move to in California, and we are moving in that direction. That's how we will get the funds, by making sure that the people that are, or the entities that are creating this consumption of oil are paying it back so that we can have a cleaner community. I agree. We need to have clean jobs. As the state senator, I will promote legislation that creates initiatives that helps us to have clean jobs, clean energy jobs. Thank you.
This is also a question for both of you. In terms of how, when you talk about clean jobs, when you talk about our economy, California right now, is in the process of a transition, but it's a gradual transition. And in the earlier question, both of you said that you'd support accelerating our climate targets to be even faster. How do we do that without impacting too heavily a change on where our climate emissions are going to come from, and dealing with it in a cost that's actually fair for every community? Because one thing that is a reality is that the communities that are going to be hardest hit economically are actually going to be the ones that are going to likely lose a lot of these jobs first. So what does that look like, and what does a fossil fuel transition in California look like for every community in California?
I'm not sure who is first.
I think Mayor? Yeah, Mayor Foley, you
Okay.
go first.
Well, so right now we're set for by 2045 that we'd have 100% of our electricity will come from renewable energy sources. And we're already moving into that kind of a transition plan. We also have 41% of our carbon emissions come from transportation alone. So transportation is the key. Retraining individuals, retraining the kinds of, and from relying on cars and relying on transportation that is based on fuel is going to be important. Also, building homes. We can create a lot of jobs if we build communities near job centers so that people get out of their cars. We build communities where there's thousands of workers already going, and we make it affordable, and we make it walkable and bikeable. That's what will help us to get there faster and help us to continue to create jobs at the same time. We have to protect the middle class. We have to protect jobs. So I will always strive to try to find solutions that try to meet the needs of everyone.
Just as a follow-up to that, so do you see a role for fossil fuels in California in the future? And if so, to what extent do you see that being?
Well, I'm not a scientist, but but I think we have to get off of reliance on fossil fuels. We have to rely on solar, we have to rely on wind, we have to rely on electric vehicles. We have to get off the reliance on fossil fuels for so many reasons. It's killing us, but also it's also creating wars. And so I'm not running for Congress, but that's another reason to get off of fossil fuels.
Do you want me to answer the second question or the first question?
Well, really, the first question, but I'll probably ask you the second question regardless.
The first question was again. It was environmental justice to some degree, right? And it was about how we're going to transition off of fossil fuels.
Yeah, how do you see that transition
And
working?
also not disparately impact communities that are already being impacted, the poor and minorities in particular.
Correct.
Look, there's no silver bullet here, as we all know. On the fossil fuel question, we do know that the problem right now utilities face is that there is cyclicality to a lot of renewable energy sources. Wind, solar, they're very cyclical for obvious reasons, and we don't yet have the battery technology to be able to have a constant flow of electricity to our homes. To get off fossil fuels realistically, we're going to have leaping breakthroughs in battery technology and efficiency. We're working on that here at UCI right now, but we're going to have to jumpstart that. That's why I think the Green New Deal is absolutely necessary, because we're not going to get to a fossil fuel-free environment without that. As far as the environmental justice question, look, I'm all in favor of electric vehicles. I have electric vehicles myself. We have solar panels on our home, but those are, I think, unfortunately, disproportionately targeted at people with the wealth to have that. We ought to be doing utility-centric subsidies for renewable energy. We ought to be providing, can I, by the way, have a few more seconds as I answer the fossil fuel question also?
Yeah, the follow-up.
Okay.
You're going to get the follow-up
and so we
regardless,
also need to be doing transit, and some of it's going to be the good old-fashioned trains. When we talk about transit hubs, trains will be part of it. It's going to be increasing the metro links in the short term, because that right now is far more efficient than other things. We're going to have traffic and gridlock unless we start moving to that. We ought to have more electric buses, but we ought to be doing things that help those who don't have the means, not just targeted subsidies at those who can afford to buy electric vehicles and solar panels.
Thank you, candidates. My name is Danny Cesena, and I am the Vice Chair of Orange County Equality Coalition, and I am going to be asking you some healthcare questions. So the first question is for the both of you. In July, the California legislature pulled Assembly Bill 1611, which is the surprise emergency bill that will limit and eliminate surprise bills that insurances doesn't cover. The problem of unexpected medical bills is that they can add tens of thousands of dollars for even relatively minor treatments or procedures. Also known as budget or balance billing, these invoices are sent to patients when they have been treated by a physician who is not part of a hospital's network, even after the attending physician has billed and even received payment from the insurer. What are your thoughts on this bill being reintroduced and possibly going forward in 2020?
I apologize. Can you repeat that question? That was a long question.
It was. So basically, AB 1611, the surprise emergency bills, a lot of your constituents actually go to emergency rooms, and even after the insurances pays the medical bills, the physician still charges patients tens of thousands of dollars. And AB 1611 was pulled in July and will be introduced in 2020. What are your thoughts on this bill being reintroduced and possibly going forward to stop surprise emergency bills?
Thank you.
Is that me?
Yes, Mr. Min.
So as a general proposition,
Dave, can you speak into your
yeah,
microphone?
sorry, I have a habit of walking away. It's the professor in me, I apologize. So as a general proposition, I'd say that it is wrong in a society as wealthy as ours with the medical technology we have for anyone to go bankrupt because of medical care or lose their homes or go insolvent or face the choice between receiving medical care and these dire choices. As far as the specifics, the way you described the bill, of course, I'd support it. We, at this point in time, have one of the worst healthcare systems in the world. California is better than most. We have reached, I think, 93% coverage, but we need to go further. We need to improve our health insurance system so that those who are covered actually are covered. And we right now have a system where insurance companies have all these incentives to try to nickel and dime us, and really it's a lot more than nickel and diming. It's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars. We have to get away from that. We have to line up their incentives. If we have to put people out of business, we got to do that, but we have to find the hooks to be able to regulate this so that this doesn't happen.
Thank you. Mayor Foley?
Yes, I would support that legislation as well. I have personal experience with this, both from myself as well as family members. My 93-year-old grandmother is living with me and recently had to go to the ER. So we understand the impacts of these kind of surprise bills. And I believe that that is something that is part of the problem with our healthcare system, but the overall system needs to be completely overhauled. And that is why I support a single payer program. I think that we need to get to some kind of a universal healthcare program because it is just outrageous when you are elderly and you don't even use a computer. You don't know how to use a computer. And the whole system is based on technology and having to type in and get your bills online. We have to make sure that our system of healthcare works for everyone, works for people who are low income, people who are high income, people in the middle, and people who are not necessarily technologically savvy.
As a follow-up question to what you just stated, Mayor Foley, and you will have 30 seconds to respond, when you mentioned universal health care coverage, does this include undocumented immigrants as well?
I think that's what we've already adopted at the California state, just recently added to the Medi-Cal undocumented youth.
Yes, it's undocumented youth up to the age of 26,
Right.
but this does not include anyone between the ages of 26 and 65.
Right.
Mr. Min, would you have 30 seconds for rebuttal?
To your question or rebuttal? I support your yes, because at the end of the day, we're all going to pay for the healthcare costs of folks. Right now, we've backloaded healthcare, so it's in the emergency room. It's costing us far more than it should. We need preventative care. When somebody gets the measles or gets really sick, that is transmittable. Obviously, people are productive members of society, and right now, the fact that our immigration system is so flawed should not be a reason to deny people what is basically a basic human right. That's my strong belief.
Thank you. Next question, and Mayor Foley, you will start.
It's Foley.
Sorry,
It's
my
Foley.
apologies. Right now, it is illegal for physicians, insurance agencies, and medical groups to deny access to gender-affirming medical care to transgender patients. However, many insurances and medical groups still put up major barriers for the transgender community to access this care. However, providers know that all of these procedures needed is legally covered based on California's Gender Non-Discrimination Act of 2012 and the Department Managed Healthcare's memo to all California state insurance agencies. What is your plan as senator to end the game of transgender Californians from having to constantly prove who they are and why we need these services?
Who's first?
Mayor Foley?
Okay. We should force people to comply with the law. I mean, no matter what the issue is regarding discrimination, compliance with the law should be enforced. So whatever department it is at the state level that is not doing their job to, maybe it's the insurance commissioner. Maybe we'd have a conversation with Ricardo. I don't know. But whoever is responsible for requiring people to comply with the law is what should happen. It's simple.
Thank you.
So I believe strongly in healthcare, again, being a human right, that healthcare related to one's identity or sexually related healthcare is, part of that package. It's what we require insurance companies to do. So yes, I would support efforts to increase enforcement, legislative, incentives or criminal penalties if necessary. Let's work with the AG, Javier Becerra, to try to make sure that insurance companies are following the law and, again, not trying to nickel and dime us because this is an endemic problem we're seeing, the discrimination we're seeing, and it doesn't just stop with certain communities. This is a pattern we see across the board. So I will stand up for trans-affirming surgeries.
Thank you. Next question, and Mr. Min, you will start. We just saw that a 10-year-old Santa Ana child committed suicide almost 2 weeks ago due to severe bullying. Even though California passed AB 917, where schools must assist children and connect them to mental health services to prevent suicide, such as the one that just occurred, the system failed this young child. What is your plan to address bullying and the high rates of suicide among our youth, particularly youth of color and those that identify as queer?
Yeah, it's one of the sad stories. We see really high suicide rates, lots of homelessness rates. As the young Asian kid in my all-white, otherwise school, I was bullied quite a lot myself growing up. Obviously not to the levels of this young person. We need to implement intervention. We need education, and one of the things I mentioned was the importance of CHAYA and implementing CHAYA across our school districts. We also need, I think, to get back to having mental health services at our schools. Right now, we have cut nursing, we've cut mental health. We are asking our teachers to do everything right now. I'm proud to have the endorsement of the California Federation of Teachers, and one of the issues that we're working on together is to try to make sure that we have the support staff needed, that teachers aren't being asked to be counselors, to be mental health people, to be interventionists. We need the staff there, we need the programs. We also need to create a culture of non-discrimination. It starts at the top, unfortunately, but you know that a big part of this is politicians, leaders who are willing to stand with marginalized communities. You've seen me out there. I promise I will continue to stand there with the trans community, the LGBTQIA plus community, communities of color, and elsewhere, because it's important to stand with people who are underrepresented. That's part of this as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bullying in schools could cause kids to, later in life, as we've seen, take their lives. When I was a girl, I don't think it matters what race, what national origin, or what identity you identify with. I remember there was a mean girl who poured oatmeal on my head every morning when I was going to breakfast to get my free breakfast. It was a lot to do with poverty and not liking the poor little girl that was going to get her breakfast. So what happened in that situation? There wasn't teachers, there wasn't counselors that engaged. We actually, right now, do not have mental health counselors for the most part on our school campuses. We have counselors that are guidance counselors, college and career counselors, but we do not have mental health counselors that are assigned to take care of kids when they see risks, when they identify red flags. Maybe it's something happening at home, maybe it's an outside source. I've been fighting to protect the most vulnerable in our communities for my entire career, and I won't stop now.
Thank you. Drug and alcohol abuse is at an all-time high, with insurance refusing to cover sober living housing because California does not offer license certification for these type of facilities. Even though drug and alcohol abuse is considered a mental health issue due to severe trauma, PTSD, depression, and anxiety, what is your plan to address this gap in coverage and provide assistance to our most vulnerable population? Mayor Foley?
I don't think that that's correct, that there's a gap in coverage. What I have found as the mayor in dealing with this industry, there's a lot of abuse in this industry related to insurance. And basically, the operators are taking people's insurance and then using it up and then kicking people out onto the curb. They're creating a cycle of, not of recovery, but of trying to get people to relapse so they can then get more insurance and get more money from that individual that is at their most vulnerable. What I've been working with Connie Petrie Norris on is a regulatory scheme that allows for licensing, that allows locals to license and permit and to protect the patients that are in these recovery homes. We also need to do more to make it more of a professionalize it, if you will. If I wanted to, I could open up a recovery home tomorrow. I don't have any professional experience with recovery. That is not good for our community. So I would work on legislation to professionalize and regulate this industry.
Thank you. Mr. Min?
Could you repeat the question really quickly?
Yes. As we know, drug and alcohol abuse is at an all-time high, and insurances are refusing to cover sober living housing because California does not offer license certification for these type of facilities. What is your plan to address this gap in coverage and provide assistance to this vulnerable population?
Yeah, look, we know that many sober living homes do abuse folks, as the mayor has suggested. We also know that there are many sober living homes that take care of their patients. Trying to divide between the good and the bad, I think, is going to be critical. I would like to learn more about the specifics of the licensing and why it didn't happen, but I think the obvious solution here is to have certification accompanied by regulation. We shouldn't get rid of all sober living homes or rehabilitation facilities. We want to rehabilitate folks, right? We want to wean them off their addictions. That's going to be a critical part of this. I believe at the end of the day, and I've got a lot of great colleagues here at UCI, only a few of whom are in the audience today, but public health is going to be critical, studying what the outcomes are. How do we get from A to Z on this, but data is going to inform us. I don't think we should just get rid of this or call them all bad. I think we do need to figure out how we can get rid of the ones that commit abuse, while creating more licensed, high-quality facilities and empowering them with the information they need to try to rehabilitate folks correctly.
Thank
Can
you.
I do a follow-up? Is that allowed on that?
I have a follow-up
Oh,
question to that,
okay.
actually. 1 second. Mr. Min, how do we do that? 30 seconds on this. How do we do that? Is that having more funding to study this? Because the cities have studied this and they've shown that there is an impact on their communities from people being vulnerable and mistreated. So what are you looking for exactly, and then how do we fund that?
Yeah, so as far as I think what you're talking about, there are some cities that have found that some sober living homes have caused negative impacts. But I think you don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak, right? Acknowledging that there are rehabilitation facilities that want to do the right thing, that aren't just churn and burn type facilities. I think we want to try to create a regime. So my belief is that as a quasi-medical facility, something that is trying to rehabilitate folks, we should subject them to certain types of minimal requirements as far as who can be there, who can operate this, as Mayor Foley suggests. But part of that would come with the certification. So again, thinking about how we best serve this, reducing the impact on communities, because no community is going to want a sober living home, as you call them, in their community. At the same time, we know that many of them do serve a valuable purpose.
To clarify, yes or no, you're agreeing with Mayor Foley that there needs to be legislation to regulate this industry?
Yes, but I also think the certification is part of this. I also think we should be making sure that that we're not just trying to get rid of sober living homes. And there's obviously going to be a lot of opposition to sober living homes because nobody wants one in their area, just like
Okay.
nobody wants affordable housing by
All right,
their
excellent.
areas.
Did you have 30 seconds, and I'm going to be really aggressive with time because I want to get to my questions, 30 seconds to respond to this?
Yes. So there already is a certification program. What's happening is that the sober living home isn't getting paid directly. It's a scam. They get paid from the medical treatment facility, and then the medical treatment facility is essentially committing fraud and paying the sober living home. And then they are doing urine tests, and they're all taking a piece of it. So we have to enforce the laws right now. That's key. We're not enforcing the insurance laws, and we need to do that. And having a state licensor inspector, like I worked with Sharon Cork Silva to implement, would help.
Thank you so much. All right, so now we get to go to my questions. Mr. Min, this question is about ACA 7. So there's currently a bill called ACA 7, which has passed the Assembly and which will be sent to the Senate. And what it does is basically lowers the voting age for California state elections on down to 17 years old. The question is, would you support this bill? And if yes, why? You have 60 seconds.
Yes, I think 17-year-olds are smart. Why not? We should be empowering the youth. I support expanding the franchise.
All right, Mayor Foley, you have 30 seconds if you disagree or have something else to add to that.
Yes, I support it, but also what I would encourage is that we do more to have year-round civics courses in 8th grade and 10th grade, as well as at the senior level.
Does that mean more funding and how
It depends on what the school district does.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, the next question is, there is currently an epidemic of injustice within our criminal justice system, which makes it 3 times more likely for Black people to be shot by the police than the general public, with there being a 60% likelihood that if there's an unarmed citizen that's been shot by the police, they are most likely a person of color. What do you commit to do to address this issue, which, according to the Washington Post, has claimed 102 lives in California this year alone? Mayor Foley, 60 seconds.
Education is the first step. Mandatory training for our police officers and our public safety officers would be the first step. And also, it's just depressing. I'm sorry. I would want to get with a group of people who care about these issues and who have ideas and come up with a good plan so that we could implement something that would better protect our most vulnerable communities.
All right, but the problem is that currently there is training. There is racial justice training going on in the police departments, and it's still not working. So is there something that has to be done as far as accountability towards the police?
Well, I guess it just depends because the police process, each department has its own unique training program. Each department has its own unique accountability process. It's not a one-size-fits-all that the state senator has a way to
So should it be a
enforce
California-wide?
compliance.
Should it be a California-wide, one-size-fits-all for, like, do you see what I'm saying? 'Cause
Yes,
there seems
that's
to
what
be
I
a
was saying.
gap.
Education should be mandatory across the board.
All right, and Mr. Min, you have 30 seconds if you want to expand on
Look,
that.
training is going to be part of the issue, so I agree with Mayor Foley here. Oftentimes what we see, I think we saw with the recent shooting in a woman's home, is people that are police officers that are not trained, but that's not going to be a panacea. The major problem we have is one of racial bias. Even if we don't think we're racially biased, we look at someone, they might look dangerous to us in a snap judgment, and all these racial biases come out in that moment. I don't know that training is the catch-all here. I do think we need more diversity and committed to diversity in our police departments. We also need to
Give him 15 more
demilitarize the
seconds.
police. I thought I had 30 seconds.
Yeah, no, I said you were stopped. I said give him 15 more seconds.
We have to demilitarize the police right now, and part of that is decriminalizing, I think, a lot of the drug offenses right now, and so I applaud the move we've done with marijuana, but we also need to, comprehensive gun control has got to be part of this as well. When you look at someone and they are always a threat to you, anybody might be a good guy with a gun who could be a bad guy with a gun any second, the police are trained to shoot first and ask questions later, and that is a fundamental problem with our police system today.
All right.
Can I respond? That's not true. The police
Go
are not
for it.
trained to shoot first and ask questions
It was
later.
rhetorical, but okay. Yeah, I will
Well, that's
rephrase
not
it.
true.
That they are often in situations where they fear for their lives and they end up shooting people because they fear for their lives. So I was running out of time, but that was what I meant to say.
They're
I
actually
appreciate the
trained to
clarification.
try not to shoot first. They're actually trained to diffuse the situation, and they're trained to try to avoid having to shoot. That's what they're trained. That doesn't mean they always do, but that's how they're trained.
Thank you.
And we shouldn't be against the police.
No, so
I mean,
no
I
one's.
wasn't-
we need
if
the
I could
police.
clarify,
For the
I was not
record-
being against the police
For the,
here.
for
It
the,
wa-
for the record, no one is against the police in this capacity. We're trying to understand the issue, which there is an issue where people are being shot.
Agreed.
And that doesn't have to be against the police. I think we have to, as a community, figure out how do we deal with this and not just with training as that has failed people before.
But as a state senator, you have an obligation not to inflame situations.
I was talking
you
about
have
gun
an
control, Mayor
obligation
Foley.
not to throw out a comment like, trained to shoot first and ask questions later, especially in Orange
Yeah.
County. We don't have a scenario like that.
I'm going to have to get to the next
If
question.
I could
'cause we're
clarify and
running-
respond to that, I will reiterate that was a slip of tongue. I said I apologize, Mayor Foley, for offending your sensibilities. What I meant
It's
to
not
say-
my sensibilities,
Can I
and
finish?
that's
sorry.
very
Okay, you guys-
sexist.
you guys-
I allowed to speak.
That's
we've-
sexist.
I allowed you to speak. Perhaps you could allow me to finish. I was
guys-
just pointing out the obvious fact that there are police that right now that go out and fear for their lives because they sense danger. I explained what I meant earlier, and I said that part of the situation has to be comprehensive gun control. When police are in situations where they fear for their lives legitimately because anybody might have a gun. That was the point I was trying to make. That I think at the end of the day, that creates a lot of tension. That creates the potential for police shooting people.
Thank you. Now we go to an easy question, which is which is on the California Healthy Youth Act, and this is going to be for Mayor Foley. Basically, the California Healthy Youth Act was. Wait, the last question was for Mayor Foley, so it's your turn,
Sure.
Mr. Mint. I'm sorry. The California Healthy Youth Act was implemented in 2016, which basically mandates that there's comprehensive sex education for LGBT people, AIDS and HIV prevention. But unfortunately, it's not being implemented in places, especially like in Orange County. How would you, as a state senator, implement these programs and make sure that they're being done?
Yeah. Now, part of this is educational for sure because there's a lot of propaganda intentionally being thrown around right now about what the California Healthy Youth Act does and does not do. I hear about school board members who should know better talking about how it requires like 6-year-olds to have sex toy training and learn about anal sex, and that none of that is true. What is required by CHIA is age-appropriate and medically accurate information, so we have to make sure that people are aware of that. I think, as I mentioned earlier, that we need penalties and incentives for school boards that comply with CHIA or don't comply with CHIA. And I'm all in favor of exploring that. Financial penalties, perhaps civil penalties, perhaps going against conservatorship over chronically intransigent school boards that refuse to implement the law. You have to listen to the law. I believe in the rule of law as a law professor. If you've got a school board out there made up of ideologically extreme folks that don't want to implement the law because of their own religious beliefs, that's their problem. They should be implementing the law, and I would explore solutions to try to make sure they do that.
Thank you, Mr. Min. Mayor Foley, you have 30 seconds.
Okay, well, you can't do a conservatorship over a school district. That's not even lawful. It's not an option. You change the school board. Everybody get out and vote to change the school board members. We support Andy Thorburn and Becky Gomez and Jordan Brandman. Okay, so yes, we should enforce compliance, because there are some school districts that don't comply. I represented a client one time, and the Westminster School District decided that they were not going to comply with the state anti-discrimination laws. What happened? There's no conservatorship. It's the funding is cut off. The state funding is cut off. And the moment that state funding starts getting cut off from these school districts, they will comply, their families will be outraged, and they will change the school board members. That's the first step, change the school board.
And what about for the schools that are not as dependent on school funding?
Still, you can change the school board.
No, but I'm saying, is there,
there is a compliance, and I did speak with Senator Connie Leyva about this issue. She's the chair of the Senate Education Committee, and she says that there is a way that you can take that compliance effort and you can go through the superintendent of instruction, who is Tony Thurmond, and he can enforce the compliance. So yes, we should enforce compliance. We have to first decide what schools are out of compliance. Is this a unique and anomaly, or is this something that's widespread? If it's something that's widespread, we'd have a different response. If it's something that's a unique anomaly, then we would probably just want to replace the school board.
Mr. Min, you have 15 seconds.
I just want to respond to the conservatorship alone. Of course, the state has the power to do that. We can pass laws if it's not already on the books. We do this with underperforming prisons. We've done it with underperforming school districts in the past. We can do it for a school district that is chronically refusing to obey the law. So I will just take objection with that narrow point.
All right. Thank you so much. And now we're going to introduce Kelsey Brewer.
I went under time for once, yeah.
All right. To save the lively of us for the last. All right. Good evening, Indivisible 48. We are almost done with the debate this evening, and I want to congratulate all of you on being proactive participants in this wonderful thing that we call democracy on a Monday evening. My name is Kelsey Brewer, and I will be serving as the moderator for the housing section of this debate. I've been involved in housing affordability issues for the last 5 years of my career, and this passion has taken me across the country, up and down the state, and has led the Orange County Register to name me as one of Orange County's most influential people, calling my work transformative for Orange County. I tell you this not because I'm running for office yet, but because I know what I'm talking about. And my hope is that these questions tonight will help you better understand where these candidates stand on housing issues. And it's important to know that because for the 6th month in a row, the California Public Policy Institute has named housing affordability and homelessness issues as the #1 and #2 issues that California voters care about. So the candidates in front of you tonight will need to be prepared to answer them. So let's go ahead and get to it. Our first question is going to be for Mr. Min. Senate District 37 is home to some of the worst housing affordability issues in Orange County. There are still pockets of affordability in the district, like Huntington Beach's Oakview community, but as interest moving into these areas continues to rise, we are seeing for-profit developers buy up these buildings in communities like Oakview and convert them into market-rate housing, displacing existing residents. What legislation would you champion to address this issue, and what specific policy fixes would you do to avoid displacement?
Sure. So obviously the good news for Orange County is that we've got a booming economy and people want to live here. The bad news is that young people, seniors, lower income folks are not able to afford to live here increasingly. Many of them are moving out to the Inland Empire. That's created congestion and traffic issues up and down Orange County. Part of the lack of affordable housing is related to the lack of federal subsidies. In 2010, the Tea Party took over. They quietly shut down a lot of the financing spigots. And if you talk to developers, what they'll tell you is that affordable housing is not something most developers are willing to do without mandates or incentives. At the state level, we can try to do some of that, but we don't have the deep pockets that the federal government does. So what we can try to do is overcome the other area of opposition, which is around local opposition to more affordable housing, local opposition to mandates for affordable housing. If you develop a new project, you have to have 30% be affordable at 75 or 50% of local area median income. Fixes like that would be important. I also support, limited overrides of local zoning around high transit hubs. I think that's important. We have to facilitate mass transit between areas like the Irvine Station and Riverside Station. That's going to be how we end up fixing
Dave,
a lot.
I'm going to jump in here with a follow-up just because I saw the stop sign here. So everything that you just said relates to production. And the question is about how do we protect the existing infrastructure and affordable housing. So can you specifically address that?
Sure. If you're talking about people living where they are, we've just passed a major rent control bill. That's going to help, but it's a short-term fix. Production is going to be the key because as more people move here, that's going to put more pressure on landlords and the like to really keep raising rents. And I'm sorry, you guys.
You're good.
Okay, and so I think that's going to be part of this. Production's important because it's the major lever we have to pull right now. We're seeing a lot of runoff of affordable housing units because of the lack of investment in them. Now, that's a federal problem, but over time we've seen that deterioration. And it's market. We're not building new units, but the ones that are existing are increasingly running off. They're turning into non-affordable units as they phase out, or they're becoming uninhabitable if they're really old. That's going to be part of the problem as well. We have to find new sources of affordable housing as well, even as we try to protect and refurbish the existing ones.
Mayor Foley, do you have something different to add to that or distinguish?
Well, a little bit. First of all, I think that to protect the existing housing, maybe provide legislation that gives incentives to apartment complex owners to accept vouchers, Section 8 vouchers, to accept homeless veteran vouchers. That partnership is often very positive. Maybe create an expansion on what Senator Umberg did with the motel conversions and partner with nonprofits, create some funding opportunities for nonprofits to partner to convert degraded motel units into very comfortable and clean housing for seniors and families.
Okay. So that's actually a perfect transition to our next question, which does deal with the question of motel conversions. And you referenced a recent bill passed by the state legislature. But many cities in Senate District 37 fall within the Coastal Commission's authority. Quick conversions of motels and hotels into supportive or affordable housing is one of the quickest ways to bring affordable units online here in Orange County. But the Coastal Commission sees this change from a transitory accommodation, like a motel or a hotel, into a permanent residential housing as limiting access to the coastal zone. So Mayor Foley, my question is, would you consider legislation that would require the Coastal Commission to allow cities to convert motels and hotels into affordable or supportive housing?
I'm going to have 60 seconds to think about that answer. I think that's, I don't know the answer. I'm okay to say if I don't know an answer because I think that requires sitting down and learning a little bit more about what the motivation is behind the Coastal Commission's position, and it's not something that I'm particularly familiar with. I know that in our area and in Irvine and Tustin and north of the coast, the motel conversions will be a lot simpler now that the change was adopted within CEQA. So I would want to make sure that we, I don't think that, I apologize. It's just that requires me to get a little bit more research.
I told you guys the questions were going to be hard. Mr. Min, would you like to answer that question? Would you support legislation that compelled the Coastal Commission to do that?
Was the issue that the Coastal Commission has with the conversions related to access to beachfronts?
Yes,
Okay.
that's the access issue.
Then I think on that narrow basis.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't understand that's what you were
Yeah,
saying.
I would support. I think I would support that change. I do think that we have a parallel concern, though, of development on the coastal areas. As I mentioned earlier in response to Mike Young, I do think we have to transition people away from coastal development. Those are not long-term solutions if they're right on the coastline. So that is something that I would consider as well, is trying to move folks away from the coast so that we're not, leaving a disaster in place as the sea levels continue to rise.
Katrina, with the knowledge of the access issue, 30 seconds.
Yeah, I'm just trying to visualize where we have motels that would prevent access in this district. And I don't really think it's an issue, unless I'm just not visualizing it right. I don't see that we have hotels that are going to prevent access to the beach, that are right on the beach. So I don't think that's necessarily an issue in this district.
Okay.
But I'd be happy to learn more.
Dave, the next question is going to be for you. You have been a very vocal supporter of SB 50, which would allow, for those in the audience, a higher density market rate housing near job and transit centers, with a small percentage of those units being required to be set aside for affordable housing. While places like Santa Ana, Anaheim, Costa Mesa, and Huntington Beach would be greatly impacted by the law, bedroom communities like Mission Viejo or Rancho Santa Margarita would likely be exempt due to the lack of public transit and job centers. Can you explain your thoughts on the need for all cities to do their fair share to address the housing crisis, and why you support a bill that would continue to de facto exempt wealthier, whiter communities across the state from building more multifamily housing?
I guess I would object to the premise of the question on some degree because, first of all, I have come out in support of the concept of SB 50. As I've said before, I would, if elected, I would work with Senator Wiener to make sure that it was accommodative of Orange County interests in particular. Second, Irvine is one of the areas that's going to be impacted. Costa Mesa is going to be impacted. These are not just like low-income, minority-heavy areas. Mission Viejo is going to be carved out to some degree because they don't have transit hubs. I think I favor more on the transit hub side, relocating, but we need more housing. We see it right now. Young people who are graduating from this fine institution can't afford to live around here. If we don't build more, we're not going to have housing for them. When the cheapest thing they can buy is an $800,000 condominium, that's crazy. And so we have to facilitate that. At the same time, we have to ease congestion. So we can't just be building. We need to facilitate mass transit. That's what that bill is designed to do, to try to facilitate more density around high transit hubs, with the idea that it will increase Metrolinx, transit, et cetera, because at the end of the day, we're going to need transit coordinated with more density if we want affordability in this county.
Dave, as a follow-up, can you share with us maybe an amendment that you would offer to Senator Wiener's office on that bill?
What are some of the issues you care about? A ton of them. Like, for example, his bill talks about job centers. I think I would refocus that to transit hubs because I think that would negatively impact certain parts of our coastal communities right now that probably are not well equipped to have more traffic. I think I'd also talk with Senator Wiener about the need to not put, there's going to be a chicken and egg question here. We need to make sure transit accompanies the density. Otherwise, we're just going to have more traffic and congestion. So we need to find also funding for transit. My vision right now in the short term is increase Metrolink trains, Amtraks, et cetera, that are subsidized to help facilitate up and down traffic that then creates the cost justification for maybe something like a limited high-speed rail between, say, here and Riverside.
Okay. Mayor Foley, do you have something different to add?
Well, I don't support SB 50 as currently written, mostly because I do believe that it's important for local planning authorities to be able to participate in the planning of their communities. They know the best about what's good for the community. Yes, you have to do a balancing test. You can't always just appeal to the most vocal voices in the room. You have to make sure that you're providing housing that is situated near job centers. We don't have a lot of public transportation centers, and so we have to do something different. That's why a one-size-fits-all across all of California won't work, and it won't solve housing for us. We have to take into consideration initiatives that would free up public land to make sure that the public land is available to build affordable housing on.
Thank you. Okay, Mayor Foley, Cities in Senate District 37 are currently going through the Regional Housing Needs Assessment Allocation process, where they will be assigned the number of affordable and above-market housing units that they need to build in the next 8 years. However, RHNA is, for all intents and purposes, a zoning bill that does not require the cities to actually build any units to be in compliance. For cities falling short of their RHNA requirements, would you support legislation adding a production mandate to RHNA that would require cities to approve projects if they have not yet met their RHNA obligations?
I actually think that that is already part of the law. When we had our study session recently about this very issue, we were informed by our city staff that there will be, and I don't remember whether it's $50,000 or $500,000 penalty for every violation. So I do think that this governor is going to be enforcing the law and penalizing communities who do not meet their housing elements. That is already evident by the lawsuit against the city of Huntington Beach. So I tend to like to build partnerships and not penalize, but if people aren't taking care of business, then we have to do something to make sure that the cities are complying with their housing elements.
And I want to provide this clarifying point before I go to Dave to give his response as well. What Mayor Foley is referring to is the housing element, and the governor's office did require all cities to be in compliance with their housing element, which does play a role in RHNA, but you can be in compliance with your housing element and still not approve affordable housing units.
Well, I don't think you can, because part of your housing element has to take into consideration your RHNA numbers. For example, Costa Mesa's RHNA numbers are somewhere around 4,200. Of those 4,200, almost 3,000 are affordable units that are required to be built. So the housing element has to be based off of those RHNA numbers. So you would be required in your housing element to put the affordable units in the housing element, and then if you're out of compliance, you would be penalized. So I guess that's how I understand it, based on 15 years on the city council and 5 years as a planning commissioner. But I know you're smart, so I don't know.
I appreciate that. Dave, do you have something different to add?
Sorry, could you repeat the question around RHNA?
Sure. Happy to do so. The basis of the question is RHNA is a zoning law. It requires cities to zone for this housing, but traditionally, cities have not been mandated to actually produce that housing. Hence why we are in the housing shortage that we are. So my question is, as a state senator, would you support legislation that added a clear mandate requirement to RHNA that if cities have not met their RHNA obligations, they are required to approve affordable and supportive housing units?
I would have to think about the legislative language, but I'm generally supportive of the concept. Again, I think we're in an affordable housing crisis in this county and in this region. To ignore that, I think, ignores reality. I have law students that are graduating with debt. They're making good salary jobs, and many of them are living in LA. They're living in the Inland Empire because it is so expensive to live in Orange County right now. That doesn't account for the college graduates who really just can't afford to live out here. We're doing a disservice to young people right now, so we should be taking affirmative steps. The unfortunate fact, look, I'd love to work with localities too. The problem is that here in Orange County, we have a number of city councils and school boards and otherwise that are dominated by extremists. Now, I'm happy to work with them. I'm happy to work on trying to get them ousted. I'm supporting a number of school board and city council candidates. I'm happy to talk to you about them later. But for now, we have to assume that we're going to face a hostile opposition that is opposed to things like building affordable housing, opposed to things like implementing quality education. And so I believe that we have to penalize them. If necessary, I support measures to try to make them obey the law that we are handing down from Sacramento.
Awesome. So you both get a freebie here, because I'm going to give you both 60 seconds to respond to this, because Aaron put this in my question bank, even though it wasn't necessarily about housing, but it's an interesting question. California recently passed transportation legislation known as the gas tax that increased car registration fees in addition to state taxes on gasoline. As wealthier Californians transition to electric and hybrid vehicles, how would you address the decrease in revenue from state gasoline taxes and the shifting of the transportation funding burden to poorer communities that can't afford more fuel-efficient cars? Dave, I think we're going with you first this time.
And so, I'm sorry, the question was that we recently passed transit legislation, that the SB 1, And so I'm sorry, I missed the rest of
You're
it.
totally fine. So SB1 did two things. The first was it increased all of the registration fees that we pay once a year when we go to the DMV. The other thing that it did was increase all of the money that we pay at the pump. As people transition to more fuel efficient cars or straight electric cars, they're not paying this part of the bucket, but poorer communities that don't or can't afford better cars or more fuel efficient cars are. So my question is, how would you first address the revenue gap in that? And second, what legislation would you introduce to address the disparate impact that it has on those poorer communities?
Sure. So on the second question, I think I answered this in part before on the need to reallocate some of the green funding that we start to raise over the coming decades into things that benefit working class communities. We should be funding more electric buses, giving less subsidies to electric cars. We should be funding more renewable energy, subsidizing more renewable energy for utilities, less for my solar panels. Right now, a lot of those subsidies are disproportionately addressed at wealthier people. We also, I think, need to shift to maybe more extraction. I didn't love the gas tax in part because it is so regressive. It hits working families the most. If you wanted to tax fossil fuels, I think the more correct approach would have been an extraction tax. We're one of the only places in the country that does not charge oil companies to extract from our lands. We also could be doing something like a carbon tax, as I mentioned, some kind of carbon fee particularly for oil companies, fossil fuel companies, and the like. Again, I want to mention I've not taken a dime from fossil fuel companies. That's an oath. I will not take a dime from fossil fuel companies. I've actually turned down money from people associated with the fossil fuel industry, and that's in part because I want to be very clear on this issue.
Mayor Foley?
Thank
60
you.
seconds?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we do need to incentivize and provide some funding so that low-income communities can benefit from buying electric cars. Rebates is one opportunity to do that. We also need to look at shifting either away from the cap and trade system to maybe a carbon fee and dividend program, much like modeled after the federal system, which is HR 763. So I would support that type of legislation because I do think that, I can't afford to buy solar panels. So it's great that you get solar panels, but average Americans, it's very hard to get solar panels or an electric car unless you have the cash to do it up front.
So our fact checkers also just let me know that as part of the gas tax bill, SB1, and both of you mentioned this, SB1 ended the electric car rebate program that was meant to help transition poorer Californians to electric vehicles. Can both of you take 30 seconds to respond, or not 30 seconds to respond, to tell us if you would be in support of reinstating a program like that?
Yes, for the fourth time, I think that we need an electric vehicle initiative so that people can get off of fossil fuels and buy electric cars. I know Dennis Bresak back there, we talk about this all the time.
Ms. Schmidt?
I know that there are measures already coming up that will likely get passed, perhaps before either of us would be in a position to take office, to do precisely that. I'm not opposed to electric vehicle rebates. We benefited from one ourselves a few years back. But at the same time, as I said before, the answer is not just electric vehicles. We need to encourage more mass transit. And we also need to encourage measures that help working class folks. Environmental justice is a real thing. Poor folks are going to pay the biggest cost from climate change. We need to be making sure that we are helping them as we talk about climate and addressing the effects of climate.
Awesome. Great job. And I'm going to turn it over to Kylie Bruce, who has a few questions on education for you.
Because of time constraints, I'm only going to ask one or two questions. So first one, we're going to get it started really quickly. We've been talking a lot about housing affordability, specifically with college students, around UCI, this campus that we're at right now. What legislation would you introduce to address the constraints of affordable housing for college students so that we can see students thriving instead of living in their cars to afford the already expensive tuition that they're, committing to attending schools like this?
Who's first?
Who's first? Min, you have 60
Okay.
seconds.
And the question was, what legislation would I support to, help college students not be homeless and housing insecure?
Yes.
So right now, you might be shocked to know that I think at this point, a third of UCI students are housing insecure. I may be underestimating that number, and or food insecure, because if you don't know where you're going to sleep tonight, you probably don't know where your next meal is going to come from because it's a trade-off. I think we have something like 15% that are actually homeless. The effects here are awful, and it relates to affordable housing, as we just talked about, the need to produce more housing. Again, the state has some levers we can pull. I've mentioned a few of the ideas I have. We need production of affordable units. We need that in Irvine. We have some fancy new buildings that just opened up around here. They're really nice. They're not very affordable. And so what we have to be emphasizing that we should be producing more housing. We should be incentivizing and penalizing cities and areas that don't produce enough affordable housing. That's got to be part of the solution as well. Finally, we've got to take short-term fixes. For those who, until we build more housing and affordable, we can't just ignore the problem. We should be not criminalizing homelessness. There are measures out there, anti-camping measures, that are enforced by a lot of cities, and what they do is they criminalize the act of sleeping in your car when you have nowhere else to go. We have to put an end to those practices because we have to deal with homelessness as it is on the ground. We have to use public health data and try to solve these solutions.
So the first thing that I would do as a state senator is I would do a deep dive into the university system, if we're talking about the UC, for example, and how much they are profiteering off of student housing. Is student housing a profit-driven program, or is it cost recovery? So in local government, we have this concept that you can't charge more than it costs. And so I'm concerned that it costs a lot more to live in student housing than actually it costs to run it. And I have a little experience with this because it was $1,200 a month for my son to live in the dorms at UCSB. $1,200 a month, and he had 2 roommates, bunk beds, 3 people in a space that probably was about this big. And so I don't think it costs $1,200 per student per month to operate that dorm. That's something I would dig deep into to find out if that's an area that we could adjust so that we could start to make housing less expensive. We've worked towards getting the tuition down. It's the housing that's costing people from being able to attend college.
Thank you. And so one more question. What would you do to keep our students in a safe learning environment? We obviously talk about gun violence as major safety concerns for our students, but there are many other safety concerns. What would you address through legislation if you were elected to help students with these issues? For example, something, like anxiety, mental health, bullying, all these kinds of issues.
All the questions seem to imply that you have to have legislation to do everything. Legislation is not necessarily required to have results. Sometimes you can just have the influence of the elected official position. You can create partnerships. You can bring people together to solve problems, and maybe the legislation is already there. But as far as creating safety in the classroom, of course, we all support that. California is moving to become the most protective in terms of gun control in the entire nation. And I 100% support our efforts there. Somebody was putting his hand down. I don't know why he would be opposed to protecting against guns in the classroom. No one should be allowed to carry a gun in their classroom. No one.
Okay, thank you. Dave, you have 60 seconds.
I have lots to speak about here. I won't talk about gun violence since I've spoken about that before. I will say that I was teaching a class not too far from here 2 years ago. There was a supposed gunman on campus. Everybody's phones went off with the Zod alerts. It was a scary moment. We're not trained for this. We as professors are not trained for a lot of things. That might be part of the solution is mandatory training for professors. Obviously, we do need mental health services. We do need health services generally. A big part of the problem here on campus, at any campus, whether it's a UC or CSU, is the problem of sexual assault. You've got a lot of young people that are not really knowing their boundaries yet. Part of that's got to be cultural. We've got to educate them. We've got to teach people at a young age about what's right and what's wrong, about treating people with dignity and respect. We're trying to make sure we do that with our 3 young children. But yeah, sometimes the law is important too. We have to make sure that people who commit any kind of sexual harassment or abuse are held accountable. We need to override the natural tendency of a lot of institutions to try to protect students. You all remember the Brock Turner case in Stanford. That was unconscionable. We need to make sure that universities are doing all they can, working with the police and not shielding perpetrators of sexual assault or harassment.
Thank you so much. All right, now we are at the almost end of our debate. So thank you guys so much for all your hard work and enduring our questions. This is the section where the candidates are going to ask each other questions. So we're going to just kind of go with the coin flip way. And Mr. Min, you can ask your question first to Mayor Foley. You have 30 seconds to answer. Mayor Foley, you have 60 seconds to respond. If there feels like there's more, I'll try to give you more, but like we're running out of time, so let's keep it all brief. And if you can go faster than 30 seconds, Dave, that'd be great.
Sure.
All right.
Okay.
Here we go. Go for it.
Recently, I came out with a proposal to end all gun shows at the Orange County Fairground. It was modeled off of recent legislation to end gun shows in San Francisco and San Diego, sponsored by Senator Scott Wiener, Assemblymember Todd Gloria Chu, and others. And if elected, I've promised that I will come out with legislation within my first 100 days to ban the sale of guns on any state-owned property across the state. Would you join me in this, I think, very reasonable cause for banning the sale of guns on state-owned property across the state? Thank you.
Cool. Awesome. I love when we do it this way. All right. Mayor Foley, you have 30 seconds to ask Mr. Min your question.
Okay, Mr. Min, you moved here 7 years ago in 2012. Official registrar records show that you did not vote in the 2012 general election and that you also did not vote in the primary or general election in 2015 when Senator Moorlach won this seat. Is it true you failed to vote in at least 3 elections since moving here?
No, I didn't vote I did vote in 2012. I did vote in the general election and the primary that year. I voted in 2016 as well. I did not vote in the 2014 election. I had to answer this on a questionnaire recently, and it was in part because I had a brand new kid and another one on the way. We were busy having children. And in part because at that point in time, we didn't have a contested, I think, a serious election at the federal level. I honestly didn't think the state Senate race was going to be that close. I didn't have a real preference between Moorlach and who is Don Wagner at the state level. And so, yeah, I could have voted. Perhaps I should have. Life happens sometimes, and I missed an election.
All right.
Can I respond?
You got 30
Okay.
seconds. Let's go.
So when my children were about that same age, I was running for
30
city
seconds.
council, and I went to the polls with both my children, 4 and 2 years old, on my hip, and we all voted together. There's
Okay.
no
Can I
excuse for
respond
not
to that?
voting.
Aaron?
15 seconds.
I will. Look, I've spent my career in public service. I spent 2 months in the 2008 elections in Gulf Coast, Mississippi, doing volunteer protection coordination. I will say that, look, I am as engaged as anyone. I had one election you can point to where I didn't vote for a lot of reasons, including that I didn't think Orange County was that competitive. And it's competitive right now because of Donald Trump, because we face a crisis. But that's really what this is about. And so I'm sorry I missed an
Yeah.
election. I really am. But, to say that I'm not civically engaged because of that, I think is what it is.
Well, above all, I think that we're very blessed to have Neil Kelly as the Registrar of Voters, who's expanded the opportunities for people to be able to vote. And so I don't think anyone on the stage or this room will be missing this next election. So with that said, we're now at closing statements. Dave, you have the 2 minutes, are we? Yeah.
Yep.
All right, yeah. But if you go 1 minute and 30 seconds, I'll love you.
I'll
but
see
that's
what
good.
I can do. Thank you all for being here today. I love the participation. I want to say 2 things. First, a lot of folks ask what the state Senate does, and the answer basically is derived from the Constitution and our system of federalism. State Senate and state legislature can do anything that is not preempted by the federal government that falls within the bounds of what is constitutional. That gives us enormous power. Right now, we have a lot of real issues to address in California. We also have a lot of issues to address in this country. And as I mentioned at the outset, I think it's critical right now that California lead the way, because even if we get rid of Trump, and God, I hope we get rid of Trump, we are going to have to forge our pathway forward, address the real issues that led to Trump's election. We have an economy that's not working for too many people. We've neglected too many long-term challenges like education, climate, infrastructure, retirement security, healthcare, and on and on and on. It's important that we act right now. And I've got experience in developing legislation, as I said. So one of the reasons I have the support of 10 members of the state legislature and the controller, Betty Yee. They will tell you that I've got the best experience for this job. I've helped craft big think legislation. I've turned it into passable legislation. You can boo all you want, but it's the truth. I think it's critical right now that we have people like me in office. And look, I'm not afraid to take on bold positions. You've seen this today. You've seen this in our Twitter feed. We don't need more Democrats in the state Senate. What we need are people that are going to lead our way forward, and I promise you I'll do that. Finally, I want to say one last thing. I said to my supporters before we came here over at Eureka, it is so important that we not have a divisive primary. We are going to have Irvine working together with Costa Mesa, working together with Laguna Beach at the end of the day. If we want to win this election, John Moorlach will not be easy to defeat. And so you have my commitment. If I lose, I will be with you. But let's try to make this clean. There's a real tendency to try to demonize the other side. I know this. I've been part of campaigns. It happens. We have to resist that temptation. Mayor Foley is trying her best. I'm trying my best. We're real people with real families. Please, let's all be respectful and kind to each other.
Thank you, Dave. Mayor Foley, closing.
Thank you. I want to go to Sacramento to be an advocate for Orange County. For so long, Orange County has not had a voice in the state Senate in Sacramento. We have a senator who votes no on the budget. We're a donor county. We send all our money to Sacramento. We don't get it back because we don't have representation. We don't have somebody there to fight for helping to fund solutions to homelessness, helping to fund for parks and libraries and better streets in our community that doesn't require an extra tax. We don't have an advocate in Sacramento right now. I will be that advocate. I can hit the ground running with legislation that I've been working on for the last 4 years relating to sober living home reform, housing, and solutions to homelessness that work, that we are delivering results on. We've had 145 people go through our homeless shelter, and we have permanently housed, as of today, 26 individuals. We have a model that works and that I think that we could implement across the state of California, and we can end homelessness as we know it. This is our #1 issue. There's lots of bold ideas. There's a lot of people a lot smarter than I am. But I am a hard worker. I bring people together. I build coalitions, and I fight for what is right. I've been doing it in 5 elections against the Republicans in our community, and I've won every time. We need someone like me to beat John Moorlach, someone who has beat John Moorlach and his cabal for 5 elections. I would be honored to serve in Sacramento as your state senator and do the hard work, learn about all the things I don't know about, and humbly, this has been a humbling experience for sure, because for those of us who think that we are so smart, there's so much we don't know. So I appreciate learning, and I'm a lifelong learner, and I appreciate you all taking the time to do this. And go to my website, foleyforsenate.com. I look forward to the next debate and challenge. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can we have another round of applause for Mayor Foley and Professor David Lynn? We'd really like to thank you. This was not at... Can you guys hear me? Okay. First, I want to thank all of our moderators tonight who've put a lot of time in, not just tonight, but they've also spent a lot of time putting these questions together, doing the research. Thank you to our candidates. I think everybody here can agree. Both of you are excellent candidates, and we are so lucky here in Orange County that we now have the chance to turn this seat out of John Moorlach's hands. So thank you. My name's Andrea Bertsteiner. I'm one of the co-leaders of Indivisible here in Orange County, OC 48. It does take a lot of work and a lot of money to put on events like this. So one thing I'd like to point out is on your program, on the back, there's a little scannable thing here, QR code.
A QR code.
a QR code that you can scan to donate. It costs about $2,500 to put tonight's event on. We had co-sponsors, but we do have a little debt we want to make up. So if you have the ability to, please scan that QR code, donate a few bucks. Also, donate a few bucks to your favorite candidate tonight. They need it too. So thank you to all of our volunteers tonight who are here early, setting everything up. And the last thing we're gonna do, volunteers, if you could, please help us take everything down when we're done. And also, one last thing we're gonna do here is the poll. So thank you to everyone who's live streaming right now. It's gonna be cut off, so goodbye. And I'm gonna hand it over to Aaron to do the polling.